Gray McAllister had awakened to many things in his 42 years. Gunfire, thunder, the screams of dying men at Antietam, but never to the kiss of obsidian against his throat. The blade caught moonlight through the cabin's single window. Cold, sharp, patient as death itself. Above him, she knelt like some dark angel of vengeance, her breathing shallow in the winter air. Long black hair spilled over bare shoulders, framing a face he recognized even in shadow. Those eyes, black as the high desert night, had haunted his dreams for 8 months. Ayanna, the Apache warrior's widow. "Do you remember me?" Her English was perfect, each word a blade of its own. "The woman you made a widow that day at Skeleton Canyon?" Gray's throat moved against the obsidian edge. A thin line of blood appeared, dark against weathered skin. He could have reached for the Colt on his nightstand, could have thrown her off, used his size advantage. Instead, he lay still as stone. "I remember." His voice was rust and whiskey. "Been wondering when you'd come." Something flickered in those midnight eyes. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment. The knife trembled, just barely, against his neck. "You've been waiting for me every night since I put your husband in the ground." The admission hung between them like smoke from a dying fire. Outside, the Arizona wind howled through the pines, rattling the cabin's wooden bones. Inside, only their breathing broke the silence, hers quick and shallow, his deep and resigned. She had expected fear, pleading, the desperate bargaining of a man who didn't want to die. But Gray McAllister lay beneath her blade, like a man who had already made peace with whatever judgment she brought. And somehow, that made everything harder. The knife wavered. Her grip loosened for just an instant, long enough for him to see the tears she'd been holding back, silver tracks on bronze cheeks in the pale moonlight. What kind of enemy was this? What kind of killer welcomed his executioner with such quiet acceptance? And what was she supposed to do with a man who seemed more broken than she was? "Get up." The command came sharp as winter wind. Slowly. Gray rose from the narrow bed, hands visible, movements deliberate. The floorboards creaked under his bare feet as she backed toward the table, keeping the obsidian blade trained on his chest. Her buckskin dress clung to curves that spoke of a life lived hard, but not broken. The kind of strength that came from surviving when survival seemed impossible. "Sit." She gestured to the single wooden chair by the cold fireplace. He obeyed without protest, settling into the chair like a man accepting judgment. The embers had died to ash hours ago, leaving only darkness and the silver spill of moonlight across rough-hewn floors. But Gray's eyes had adjusted. He could see her clearly now, the proud tilt of her chin, the way her free hand trembled almost imperceptibly at her side. "Why?" The question escaped her, before she could stop it. "Why aren't you afraid?" Gray's weathered face remained impassive. "Should I be? I could end this. Right now. Yes." His tone held no challenge, no mockery, simply acknowledgement. "You could." The honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. She had tracked him for 3 weeks through the Arizona wilderness, following the trail of a man who lived alone, worked alone, existed like a ghost on the very edge of civilization. She had expected to find a monster. Instead, she found something worse, a man who looked as hollowed out as she felt. "You killed my husband." The words tasted like ashes in her mouth. "Nalnish, the bravest warrior of our people." Gray's eyes, pale blue like winter sky, met hers without flinching. "Yes. He was everything to me." "I know." "Then why?" The knife shook in her grip. "Why did you have to?" "Because he was trying to kill Lieutenant Morrison." Gray's voice carried no defensiveness, just simple fact. Your husband was a warrior. He knew the risks, same as I did. Ayana's breath caught. In all her nights of planning this moment, she had never expected him to speak of Nalnish with respect, with understanding. He fought like a man possessed that day. Gray continued quietly. Took 3 of my bullets before he went down. Never seen courage like that. Not even in the war. The knife clattered to the table as her hand flew to her mouth. A sob escaped, harsh and broken in the cabin's silence. Don't, her voice cracked. Don't you dare speak of him like you knew him. I didn't know him, but I knew men like him. Good men fighting for what they believed in. Gray leaned forward slightly, his voice gentling. Just like I was. She stared at him, this enemy who spoke her husband's name with reverence, who faced death with the same quiet dignity Nalnish had shown in life. It should have made killing him easier. Instead, it made everything impossibly complicated. You want a drink? Gray nodded toward the bottle of whiskey on the shelf. Before you decide what comes next? Ayana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks in the dust and tears. Why would you offer me whiskey? Because you look like you need it as much as I do. She watched him rise slowly from the chair, moving to the shelf with the careful grace of a man who had learned to telegraph his intentions to nervous fingers on triggers. The whiskey gurgled into 2 tin cups, amber liquid that caught what little light filtered through the window. He set 1 cup on the table near her, close enough that she could reach it without moving far from the knife. The gesture spoke of understanding, of a man who had spent enough time around grieving people to know they needed their weapons close. To your husband, Gray raised his cup. May he find better hunting grounds than these. The Apache blessing, spoken in perfect pronunciation by the man who had killed her husband, shattered something inside her chest. She reached for the whiskey with unsteady hands, the liquid burning her throat as she drank. How do you know our words? Learned some Apache during the campaigns. Figured if I was going to fight a man, I should at least know how to show him proper respect when he died. Another crack in the wall she had built around her heart. This was supposed to be simple, clean. Justice served cold in the dead of winter. But nothing about Gray McAllister was simple. You're not what I expected. The admission escaped before she could stop it. What did you expect? A monster. She drained the rest of her whiskey, the burn familiar now. Someone I could kill without thinking twice. Gray's smile held no humor. Sorry to disappoint. The wind outside intensified, rattling the shutters and sending drafts through gaps in the walls. The cabin suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. Just 2 damaged souls sharing whiskey and honesty in the middle of nowhere. Tell me about him. Gray's request caught her off guard. Your husband, what was he like when he wasn't trying to kill soldiers? The question hung in the air like smoke. Ayana stared into her empty cup, seeing memories instead of tin. He laughed. The words came soft as prayer. Nalnish had this laugh that could fill our whole lodge. The children loved him for it. She rose from the table, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a woman accustomed to silence. The moonlight painted silver lines across her profile, the proud nose, the full lips that had once smiled more than they frowned. He taught me to speak your language, said knowing the enemy's words was the first step to understanding their hearts. She turned back to Gray, and he caught his breath at the raw pain in her eyes. Ironic, isn't it? Not ironic. Wise. Gray poured more whiskey, the silence stretching between them like a taut rope. My Sarah used to say the same thing about the Apache. Said if more folks tried to understand, instead of just fight, maybe there'd be less graves to dig. Sarah? My wife. The words came rough as sandpaper. Fever took her and our boy 3 years back, right before I headed west. Ayana's hand drifted unconsciously to the obsidian blade. So, you understand loss? I understand running from it. Something in his tone made her look closer. Gray McAllister sat slumped in his chair like a man carrying invisible weight, the kind that never got lighter no matter how far you traveled or how much whiskey you poured down your throat. Is that what brought you to Apache country? Running? That, and a need to forget. He met her eyes. Funny how a man can travel 1,000 miles and still find himself in the same hell. The wind chose that moment to slam against the cabin with renewed fury, and both of them turned toward the sound. But beneath the natural howl of winter air, something else rode the night. Hoofbeats, coming fast. Gray was on his feet before the sound fully registered, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun belt hanging on the wall. Company. Whew. Nobody good. Not this time of night. Not in this weather. He buckled the Colt around his waist with practiced efficiency. You know how to use that Winchester over the door? Ayana looked at him like he'd grown a second head. You're asking your would-be killer to arm herself? Those riders aren't coming for a social call. And whatever sins are between us, I won't see a woman hurt on my watch. The hoofbeats grew closer. At least 4 horses, maybe more. Through the window, Ayana could see torches flickering through the trees, casting dancing shadows across the snow. Gray tossed her the rifle. She caught it with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned to shoot before she learned to read. Deserters? Worse. Claim jumpers, probably. Been hitting ranches up and down the valley. Gray moved to the window, pressing his back to the wall. They see smoke from the chimney. Figure there's something worth taking. What do they usually take? Gray's jaw tightened. Whatever they can get their hands on. The implication hit her like a physical blow. She had come here to kill this man, but the thought of those riders taking her, of being used and discarded like so much refuse, sent ice through her veins. How many bullets? She asked, checking the Winchester's chamber. Enough. You any good with that? Ayana worked the lever action with smooth precision, the metallic sound sharp in the cabin's confines. Nalnish taught me well. The first rider emerged from the tree line, a scarred man with wild hair and wilder eyes. Behind him came 3 others, all armed, all wearing the hard look of men who had chosen to live outside any law but their own. McAllister. The leader's voice cut through the wind. We know you're in there. Come out peaceful and maybe we'll make this quick. Gray spat into the cold fireplace. Like hell. What do you want? He called back. Heard you struck silver up the canyon. Figure you owe the community a share. Heard wrong. Maybe. But we'll be taking a look anyway. And whatever else you got worth taking. The leader's eyes found the cabin's single window, and Ayana saw his expression change when he spotted movement inside. A cold smile spread across his bearded face. Well, well, got yourself some company, McAllister. Indian girl from the look of her. He turned to his companions. Boys, this night just got more interesting. The comment sent rage burning through Ayana's chest. She had faced death, loss, and heartbreak, but she would not, could not, endure what these men had in mind. Back window? She asked Gray. Leads to the canyon, but it's a 30-foot drop. Better than what they're offering. Gray looked at her, really looked, and saw something that hadn't been there before. Purpose. The kind of deadly focus that came when a person had finally found something worth fighting for, even if that something was just the right to choose her own death. On 3, he said, You take the two on the left. I'll handle the others. Wait. Ayanna's hand found his arm, her touch warm against his skin. If this goes badly, it won't? But if it does? Her eyes searched his face. I want you to know. I'm glad you weren't what I expected. Gray's thumb traced the line of her cheek, wiping away a tear she didn't know had fallen. Me too. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then the first gunshot shattered the night, and instinct took over. Glass exploded inward as the Winchester bullet found its mark. The first raider spun and dropped, his torch igniting the dry pine needles beneath the cabin's eaves. Orange light danced across the walls as Gray put 2 round center mass into the second man, but the other 2 had flanked wide, using the chaos as cover. Behind you! Ayanna's warning came just as boots crashed through the back door. Gray spun, Colt blazing, but the third raider's shot took him high in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him to one knee. The Winchester spoke again. The raider's head snapped back, and he crumpled beside the overturned table. Ayanna worked the liver, brass casing spinning through smoky air, but the fourth man was already inside, diving low as her shot splintered wood above his head. He tackled her to the floor, the rifle skittering away across rough boards. Big hands closed around her throat, and she saw her death in pale, bloodshot eyes. Pretty little squaw. Gonna have some fun before... The obsidian blade took him just below the ribs, angled up toward the heart just like Nalnish had taught her. His weight collapsed on top of her, hot blood spreading across her buckskin dress. Silence fell like a curtain. Only the crackle of spreading flames and Gray's labored breathing broke the night stillness. Ayanna pushed the dead man off her, gasping, her hands shaking as she wiped blood from the sacred blade. Across the cabin, Gray struggled to his feet, left arm hanging useless, crimson spreading down his shirt. You hit bad. She moved to him without thinking, her hands going to his shoulder. Seen worse, but his face was pale, skin clammy with shock. Need to get out. Fires spreading. Through the broken window, flames licked at the cabin's eastern wall. The dry wood caught fast, filling the air with smoke and the sharp scent of burning pine. Soon the whole structure would be a pyre. Gray tried to retrieve his rifle, stumbled. Ayanna caught him, his weight heavy against her smaller frame. For a moment they stood pressed together, her arm around his waist, his good hand gripping her shoulder. The canyon, he said, only way out. They made it to the back window, just as the front wall caught fire, in earnest. Gray looked down at the rocky drop, then at his wounded arm. I can't climb down one-handed. Not without falling. Then we jump. You'll break your neck. Ayanna's laugh held no humor. I came here to die tonight anyway. At least this way I choose how. She helped him through the window frame, then followed, both of them hanging from the sill by their fingertips as flames roared behind them. The canyon floor looked impossibly far away, all jagged rocks and unforgiving shadow. Together? Gray asked. Together. They let go. The impact drove the breath from both their bodies. Ayanna rolled, buckskin tearing on sharp stone, but came up whole. Gray landed harder, his wounded shoulder hitting first, the impact tearing a curse from his lips. Above them, the cabin burned like a funeral pyre against the star-drunk sky. They lay there, in the cold canyon bottom, breathing hard, alive against all odds. When Ayanna finally sat up, she found Gray watching her with something that might have been wonder. You saved my life, he said. You saved mine first. The truth of it settled between them like something alive. An hour ago, they had been hunter and prey. Now they were something else entirely. Two people who had faced death together and found something worth living for in the process. Gray's cabin was gone, but he kept a line shack up the canyon for winter storms. They made their way there, in silence, his good arm draped over her shoulders, her body warm against his side. The small shelter held supplies, blankets, a flask of medicinal whiskey. She cleaned his wound by lamplight, her touch gentle, as she stitched the ragged edges closed with thread from her dress. He watched her face in the golden glow, the concentration in her dark eyes, the way her tongue peeked out slightly as she worked. "Why?" he asked when she finished. "Why help me?" Ayana's hands stilled on the bandage she was wrapping around his shoulder. "Because when those men threatened me, you stood between us, even knowing I had come to kill you." "And the revenge? For your husband?" She was quiet for so long, he thought she might not answer. Outside, the wind had gentled, and through the single window they could see the orange glow where his cabin had been. Nalnish used to say that hatred was like holding a burning coal in your heart. It hurts you more than the person you want to throw it at. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been carrying that coal for 8 months. Tonight, for the first time, I felt it go cold." Gray's good hand found hers, calloused fingers intertwining with smooth bronze skin. "What happens now?" "I don't know." The honesty of it frightened her. She had lived for revenge so long, she didn't know what life looked like without it. "I don't know who I am if I'm not his widow seeking justice." "You're Ayana." His thumb traced across her knuckles. "The woman who saved my life. The woman who's sitting here now, when she could be anywhere else in the world." Something broke open in her chest. Not the sharp crack of more damage, but the gentle splitting of something ready to bloom. She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his uninjured shoulder. "I can't stay," she whispered. "My people, if they knew—" "I know." His lips found the crown of her head, the kiss soft as prayer. "I wouldn't ask you to choose between worlds." But when she lifted her face to look at him, he saw his own hunger reflected in her eyes. The need for connection, for touch, for someone who understood the weight of loss and the price of survival. She kissed him first, tentative, testing, like a woman learning to trust again. He responded carefully, his good hand cupping her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. The kiss deepened, became something desperate and necessary, as healing. When they made love, it was with the intensity of two people who had found each other at the very edge of the world. Her skin was silk and shadow in the lamplight, his touch reverent as he traced the curves and hollows of her body. They moved together with desperate tenderness, finding solace in each other's arms, two broken things creating something whole. Afterward, she lay curled against his side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Through the window, the first pale traces of dawn touched the eastern mountains. "I have to go," she said. "I know." But neither of them moved. They lay there as the sky lightened, watching the world wake up around them, memorizing the feel of skin against skin, the sound of synchronized breathing. When she finally rose and dressed, he didn't try to stop her. Instead, he watched her braid her long hair, her movements graceful and sure. She left the obsidian blade on the table beside the lamp, not as a threat, but as a memory. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Ayana paused at the door, her hand on the rough wood. "In another life, perhaps. One where there's no blood between our people. And in this life—" She turned back to him one last time, and he saw tears silvering her cheeks. "In this life, we had one night. And sometimes, that has to be enough." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Gray listened to her footsteps fade, then the sound of her horse moving up the canyon trail. When silence settled again, he rose and went to the window. She was already gone, vanished into the morning mist, like something he might have dreamed. On the table, the obsidian blade caught the early light, no longer a weapon, but a promise that some wounds could heal, that some enemies could find peace, and that sometimes love bloomed in the most unlikely ground. Gray picked up the knife, running his thumb along the smooth, volcanic glass. The cut on his throat had scabbed over, but this would leave a different kind of scar, the kind a man carried in his heart, warm as whiskey on a cold night. If this tale moved you, let us know with a like, and subscribe for more stories from the untamed frontier, where hearts collide and destinies change with a single night. Tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We love hearing from fellow travelers on this journey through the wilder corners of the human heart.